Welcome to The Kitchen Table, a conversation about faith, music, and culture. Join Shine.fm's ministry director Brian McIntyre Utter and his son Jake around the table for this week's chat.
Welcome to The Kitchen Table. My name is Jake.
And I'm Brian.
And we are a father-son show talking about faith, music, and culture.
And we're so glad that you're here today. You know, one of the things, by the way, welcome back.
Yes.
It's been a few weeks since we've done a new episode.
I have been in quarantine.
Yes.
And it was so much fun.
Because one of your roommates tested positive, so the remainder of the roommates had to quarantine for 2 weeks.
So that's why we haven't produced any shows recently.
Well, it's glad that you're out and among
Thank you.
human beings
the land
again.
of the living.
Today is an interesting discussion, and honestly,
I'm excited.
I don't know. This discussion could go in a 1,000 different directions.
Yeah.
We start the program off by talking about a faith topic. We'll move into music and culture a little bit later, but today we're talking about the generational divide.
What the show is, basically.
We celebrate generations. That's when we do our music segment. We celebrate the differences of music taste and those kinds of things. But this whole purpose of this is to start having these conversations between the parents and the kids, no matter the ages, to just hash out stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we started this, because we've always had these discussions. We wanted to continue these discussions when you went off to college, and we're able to put them in front of a microphone now and have fun. So generations.
Should we say our generations? You're
Well,
Gen
let's
X.
define generations that we're talking about here, because one of the things we're going to talk about for the first time in the history of, quote, the church, there are 5 generations.
Yeah.
5 generations. There are those that are older than the baby boomers. Baby boomer generation started in 1946. So these are people that are up in age. They are called the traditionalists. They're also called the greatest generation from the World War II era. Those are the elderly. Then you have those who started getting born in 1946, which are the boomers, and those are my parents, which are still alive today.
My grandparents.
And then I came along, and we are Generation X. That started in 1964, I believe.
Yeah.
And so I'm an X, and I'm an early Xer. And then we have the millennials. And the millennials came along, I think, 1986, 87. And then they usually wrap up late 90s or around the year 2000. And then that next generation, which you're on the middle, is just
That's the thing. We're
Gen
both,
Z.
We're both odd ducks. You're in the middle of Boomer and Gen X, and I'm in the middle of Millennial and Gen Z.
And they call those the betweeners.
The Zillennials.
The betweeners, if you can say that way. They actually will have characteristics from both of those generations. And that's true. I've always felt like I've had a foot in the Boomer generation and a foot in the X generation, but at the same time, I have many of my characteristics that don't fit either.
You're just weird.
So that defines it. I'm an Xer, and you're a Zillennial.
It's a thing.
A Gen Z, also known as digital natives. So
that is true. I think we're just going to dive in here.
Let's just jump right into it.
Well, I mean, as you said, this is the first time the church has ever experienced 5 different generations at one time. And I don't, is there another one past Gen Z? Have we hit a new?
It's usually about a 20-year period.
Oh, so no. Well,
so
I guess
we're
I'm
getting
20
close.
now. We're getting close, yeah.
Yeah, we're getting close to another transition to another generation.
So we're close to 6.
Yeah, but that traditionalist will eventually be gone. So
it's an interesting dynamic in the church. I've been surrounded by the church my whole life, and I've always found it interesting that church is a lot like a family. There's a wide variety of ages. I mean, you have 5 different generations.
Right.
So you have the great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, all this stuff. It's an interesting dynamic and conflict with change. And I think that's
change is a big part of it.
A big thing.
Because the older you become, the less likely you want change.
And it's weird. I mean, we were talking about this right before we were recording, is the traditionalists, for example, do not want change. They want their stuff that they grew up with. But the thing is they're the least likely to be future-minded. Or not least likely, but...
Well, yeah. I mean, it really comes down to the issue of mindset. If you're over a certain age, and who knows what that age is. Even in the Boomer generation, you start developing that mindset of, I like it the way it is. Let's face it, we all go back to our favorite music is the music of our youth. My dad, loves the Beach Boys. He has cassettes in his truck and it's the Beach Boys. That's what he listens to. I go back to the 80s. You're going to go back to your teenage years. That's just the way it is. And so that doesn't mean, and music's not a part of this discussion, but you look at things through different lenses.
Yeah.
And even theologically, these different generations have been influenced in different ways. And so they read even Scripture through different lenses.
Yeah. I think the hard thing is that with the different lenses and the different worldviews that we look through, that creates there's the whole joke of okay boomer that millennials and Gen Z is
and
using,
Karen.
and Karen
Yeah.
and all this stuff. And it's because I'm blaming both generations for this problem, is we're not both listening. I feel like the younger generations can't understand what it was like because we never experienced it. And so...
Well, there are different experiences. I mean, let's face it, certain generations face certain things.
Yeah.
The boomers, they were born after World War II, but they also experienced the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So that's a big thing. My generation had less war, but we still had the Gulf Wars. And then the millennials, they had to deal with 9/11. So there's just certain things that define generations, as well as technology and the expansion of technology and the globalization that has happened over their lifetimes. These all affect the lenses that we have when we look at our world, when we look at Scripture, when we look at the church, and then when we look at our own personal relationship with Jesus. It's interesting. I read this book by my friend Hayden Shaw. It's called Generational IQ. It's just a fascinating book. It really is. It really looks at generations. He talks about how there's two new life stages that are emerging as generations go on. There is a longer emerging adulthood for 20-somethings. You know, the whole term adulting.
Yeah.
Well, I've read reports where they say now adolescence goes till age 26 or 27 now. Another one is a longer retirement. Folks are living longer. There is another uncharted group of those that are living longer and a longer retirement years. Yeah. That poses new challenges for the church and for our relationship and how that all works together. And different generations bring different strengths to the understanding of what church is, who God is. When you look at those traditionalists, it was all about doctrine. That was their major focus. It was about the doctrine of the church. But you have many denominations, many churches today, many different traditions. And so what happened, especially the boomers, and one of the great strengths they had in their generation is they brought God close. That's one of the things they did. They brought God close. We're more focused today on an expansive God, on a relationship with God, on bringing God close to us. And it's less focused on the doctrine of the traditionalists. Yeah. I think that's a tough shift for many people to take. From your generation, because this is the boomer that kind of did this, and then I think the Xers also, it's almost like they brought God even closer. Yeah. From your generation, what are you looking for when it comes to a relationship with God? What do you think your generation is?
Well, I think my generation, we grew up hearing about, oh, you need a relationship with Jesus Christ. Yeah. That's how you get to heaven.
Has the focus been, this is my curiosity question just popping up. Has the focus been for you, is it a relationship with Jesus Christ or is it a relationship with God?
For me personally, God.
Interesting.
And not Jesus Christ. I always saw it as Jesus Christ is my example of what I was supposed to live like and be like on this earth. Right. But my relationship is with God. Okay. That's just how I see it. And then the Holy Spirit is something that is just working on this earth.
That's working in you daily.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think for my generation, I obviously don't know everyone in my generation.
Right.
I'm speaking for me personally,
but
I think we're very action based, but we also understand that action is the way to get to heaven.
So it's all about a works relationship. Do good and you'll get there. Keeping score.
No, because we don't do it for that reason.
Okay.
We just want to have a better earth because we've been through hard times. My generation, now we have lived through a pandemic, social injustice, just this year. Exactly. Yeah. We've had very hard political years. We've had
economical years.
And like 2008 especially. I remember that was when we moved here.
Right.
And I was like, oh, wow, this is really hard. Fortunately, like we didn't have to struggle that hard. I mean, we struggled, but we didn't. We were fortunate to be blessed enough. But also, I think we're very simplistic people. I've noticed that.
You want to live simply? And what does that look like for you?
We want to live happily, and we understand that materials aren't the way to happiness. It is through relationships and through loving each other. I think this world has been so full of hatred and just hard times that we just want to good vibes only is kind of a quote of what our generation, and good vibes is like happy thoughts, like let's bring happiness and joy into the world. Especially as Christians, I think my youth group was really weird because we never really had that much conflict. We all loved each other, and we would watch other youth groups in the area, and they would kind of have they would have cliques. And we wanted to be together and be happy together. And so I think that has picked up more and more into youth group. It's not about the materials. It's not about I was talking with my it's not about the job. Yes, we want to have enough money to be able to support our family or to support ourselves and to be happy with material things because, we still live on earth. We need food.
I was going to ask you, do you want to have those material things, or do you think it's crazy that we have so many storage units on this planet?
I've always thought that's crazy because I'm just your son and you have always thought that was crazy. I think we're just happier with quality time.
Okay.
I think
so. It's all about experience and friends, and not necessarily.
And I think
stuff.
that's changed the family dynamic of this generation. I think, growing up, we never really had family friends. We did when we lived on the mission field because we all lived in a gated community together.
Right.
But when we moved to the States, we had maybe one. And
that's because we weren't necessarily close.
And we moved so
family.
much. But I think, especially in today's, I can see when I have kids and my generation having kids, I can see a lot of family friend vacations happening where it's just this I think small groups is going to boom in the church. And they already are. There's some churches that are just, they don't do Sunday school, they do small groups.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the best way because, I still love Sunday school. And Sunday school, in a sense, is a small group. But I think in home, outside of the church building, outside of the four walls that is church, which I think that will help because I think this mindset of, we only keep Jesus inside the four walls, that is false. But I think that will grow a lot with my generation.
One of the interesting characteristics of especially millennials is that they tend to be more tribal. So I think, again, the small group or vacationing with friends, when I say the word authenticity, what does that mean to you? Is that important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Authenticity is just being yourself and not being what people want you to be. I think that's one of the hardest things to struggle with in my generation. I know I struggle with it in the fact that I want to be authentic, but I also want to make people happy that I'm around. And so I will become something that I'm necessarily not to make people happy.
But that's not really authentic.
But that's not authentic. But we want to be authentic.
Do you think...
And so we have been working on to become more authentic.
Yeah, I get that. Do you think that the desire to be authentic has been drastically influenced from the digital persona?
Yes, absolutely.
That you've had to create? Well, your generation has had to create.
Especially, we're digital natives. Social media was created when I was alive. Social media has played into that platform of putting your best foot forward, acting like you're okay when it's not okay. And I think why the phrase, it's okay to not be okay, is so powerful to everyone who is my age or in my generation. Because I think we grew up in this fact of, for example, my grandparents, your parents, I feel like they're very much pull yourself up from your own bootstraps. And you kind of picked up with that, but you're also just a freak.
That's a generational thing.
And it's a generational thing. And so I think...
Did you just call me a freak?
Yes, because you are. I am too. But I think we heard this as kids, as young kids, and so we did it. And then so we had to say, it's okay, we have to be okay all the time. But then social media gave us that platform to be able to hide more. And
live a facade.
Yeah. And so I think especially with growing up and the pandemic and everything, I think that's created, I am tired of not being okay when I'm supposed to be. And I think that's why it's created such a spike in therapy.
Probably, yeah.
Because people are they're tired of not being okay.
Let's shift a little bit here. The emerging adults that we've talked about, this new group, some of the characteristics from this new group, these 20-somethings, is they're characterized by change and exploration.
Yeah.
So that tends to be less stability. So they move a lot. They might switch roommates a lot. In college, they might switch majors a lot. I'm not pointing my finger.
That's totally me, though.
And so that's the new experiences, change, a continual focus on change has become a part of that.
Yeah. And I think that for me, for example, I've changed my major maybe 5 times, and I'm about to finish my first semester of junior year. I think it's because we don't want to fit into a box. I know for me, my advisor for the communications department, I love Dr. McLaughlin. She said, I think majors are kind of, sorry, this is my therapist, but McLaughlin is also, sorry, my therapist. She said, majors are a box.
Yeah.
And the thing is that your generation does not want to be inside of the box. They want to do whatever they want to do because that's the way we grew up. I mean, so for me, for example, I'm in a very broad degree now. I'm in a multimedia. I can do video, radio, TV, anything really, journalism.
Which is where everyone should be.
And I love that. I love that it's so broad and that I can specifically dive into one, but I still have the accessibility to everything else. And that's perfect for me. It's interesting because I was social work, which is also a broad thing, but it's very similar. With communications, it's not. I can either go record a podcast or I can go record TV. It's just an interesting dynamic of, I honestly don't understand how people can be a nursing major and become.
You have to be focused on that.
You have to be focused,
and that's got to that's got to be something you're definitely.
I know
called
my
to.
favorite classes in high school were electives because they could be different every year.
Can we look at generational stuff here? Some thoughts on the older generations versus younger generations when it comes to how church is done. Okay. Older generations they attend service weekly. They prefer the traditional style of music. They spend regular time in devotional activity. They have a strong sense of belonging to their denomination, if you will. They like to be involved in community-based, church-based community service, justice, and welfare activities. And they like to be involved in community-based service like care and welfare activities. The younger generation, they are more likely to be involved in small groups. You've talked about that.
Yeah.
They prefer the contemporary style of music and worship. They feel that their gifts and skills are encouraged. So it's sort of like take the spiritual gift survey and figure out what you are good at, and we'll plug you into that. They have helped others in a wide range of informal ways. They value outreach, to be involved in evangelistic activities, to actually invite others to church. And they're more likely to be newcomers to church life. They have switched denominations or they've transferred congregations in the previous 5 years. We've touched on this, change. Talk about loyalty when it comes to the church. You've mentioned that church becomes like family and these are people you do life with, but your generation at the same time says, if I don't like this so much, I'm going to find somewhere else that I like.
Yeah, that's a hard question because I know for me, for instance, I'm your son. I'm a servant heart by nature. My loyalty will stand with people that I am with currently. But if I notice something or get hurt by something or get overworked and exhausted, I know I can leave. That's the thing. I know that there's another church there. And that's not necessarily me saying like, I can just up and at. But I think loyalty.
But changing and switching are not a big deal.
Yeah, it's not hard for us.
For your generation. Interesting.
But because I feel like my generation, we're pretty loyal people to the people that we trust. And if something's significant, and that's the thing I think is really hard, is that a lot of people worship the church and not Jesus or God.
Now, this is an interesting shift when you talk about generational divide, because your generation, you trust people when they're authentic, and you're probably more trusting.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
A big verse that I always heard growing up was 2 Timothy 4:12. And that's the verse, it's, do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example in believers and speech and love and all this stuff. And I think, especially, I'm really only speaking for Christians in this generation, I think that created this sense of, I can do something. I can make a difference even when I'm a young kid. And so that's why youth bands became, I feel, more popular. That's why, you see a lot of younger people leading. I mean, I remember in high school, I was helping out with children's church. I was on the youth band. I was in the big band. I did a lot. And the thing was that I also got burnt out. I got really exhausted because they were expecting me to help every week. That's the one thing that I feel like the church kind of hurts. And that's because some people just worship the church instead of worshiping God. And so they get hurt by the church, and then they take it as God.
Yeah.
And it's like, God, why?
It's like the book, I love God, but I don't like the church.
Yeah. And I think that's why in my generation, there's a lot of people that either leave the church because they were hurt by it. Like for me, for instance, I think if I had served the church, I don't think I'd be a Christian right now. And it's an interesting thing because I think we're loyal unless someone hurts us, and we've been hurt.
Yeah, let's face it.
Everyone's been hurt.
Hurt damages loyalty.
Yeah.
Even with a pet.
And
you
I
hurt
think
the pet will not be loyal.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, there's a lot of hurt in our generation. And I hate that that's how it is. I feel we're very trusting. We're very open to people until they hurt us.
We look at a couple of specific things here when it comes to generational divide that do affect the church. Millennials are increasingly in favor of new family forms.
Yeah.
So the definition of a family has shifted dramatically and what that looks like. And how does that affect the church when the generation is more accepting of that?
Yeah.
The traditional family of what my generation, what my parents' generation thinks is a traditional family is shifting for the younger generations.
You want to know what I think it is?
What is that?
You said earlier, millennials are more about traveling, new experiences, right?
Right.
And so I think you have this poster on your wall, and it's all the students that you've graduated and where they're at now. And a lot of it is in the Midwest region. All of it's in the Midwest. A lot of it's in the Midwest.
So they're not traveling far.
They're not going far. So they're around their family more. And so they have that direct family. Millennials, now there's a few, granted, some millennials are still in college,
Right.
but most of the younger ones are farther away.
It just depends. What I tell my students is, hey, you're 22 years old.
Yeah.
Take a job anywhere.
Well, and
Nothing's
so I think millennials have learned how to create family where they're at.
Gotcha.
For older generations, it's harder to understand how a best friend can become a brother to you. For me, I can understand. I also grew up in a space where I didn't have my family close.
True.
I mean, grandma and grandpa lived 13 hours away
By plane.
by plane. I learned how to accept other missionaries as my aunt and uncles and cousins.
Right.
So
okay.
like Aunt Charlie and Uncle Barry, I will still call them Aunt Charlie and Uncle Barry. And Alyssa and Andrew and Alex are all my cousins still.
Yeah.
With the amount of newness and traveling, I think that what has created the dynamic of family, the shift in dynamic of family.
You mentioned earlier about environment. Your generation is passionate about taking care of the environment. And I think a lot of that has to do, again, with the influence. You grew up in schools where they teach you about caring for the environment, anti-pollution campaigns. We had that in a sense when I grew up in school, but it wasn't near what it is today. There was no Earth Day. There wasn't an emphasis on this. I personally think, as followers of Christ, it is our responsibility to take care of God's creation.
Yeah.
But there is even more of an emphasis on taking care of the environment today in your generation. How do you view that? How do you view the church responding to that?
A lot of churches you see nowadays are food pantries and gardening ministries and all this stuff. And they're taking care of people. And not every church is doing necessarily like a nature ministry where we go clean up, but a lot of services, so like, for example, I did a couple youth conferences and all this stuff, and we went and like cleaned the parks and all this stuff. I think you see a lot of that, but also I think with my generation, we know how to volunteer outside of the church. We know how to, you said earlier that the older generations are more willing to do like in-church ministries and volunteer.
Well, it's still outside, but it's church-based community
and
service.
I think with my generation, we understand that God is within us, not within the wall or not within the name church.
Right.
And so I think we are more open to doing service and helping.
And partnering with non-church organizations to make a
and
difference.
bringing God into that. And I think that's amazing. And I think that's really important because we love being the light of the world. We love being the light of Christ in the world. So it's just an interesting switch. And I'm not saying that someone's doing it wrong. I think they're both important and needed. That's the thing I love about the church and the 5 different generations. They all work together.
At least we hope they do.
We hope they do. I mean, not every church is doing it right, but if they are doing it right, they have something for each generation.
Just wrapping this up, for the first time in history, we have 5 generations, different generations in the church. Never has really happened before. And many say that these generational differences will be the largest or is the largest challenge that churches are facing. What we're seeing in The success of being able to manage this is one simple thing, that there is a common vision for the future, and that people not only understand the vision, but they own the vision. And so you have to get all 5 of those generations to understand the vision and to buy in to that vision. And it's going to be tougher with the older generation because they're the ones that don't want change. But we would hope and pray when you look at that vision and you understand what we are wanting to do, the vision, then you will buy into it.
Yeah.
Even though you're giving up preference, and that's a personal preference. The bottom line vision of any church is that more and more people know Jesus and that we're overpopulating heaven, plain and simple.
Mm-hmm. Well, that wraps up this faith discussion. Now moving into Music Matters.
So in the segment of Music Matters, again, generational differences. We're talking about music in this segment. We bring songs. I bring a new song. You bring possibly a new song each week, and then we'll dive back in the vault for
the oldie but goldie.
That's right. And so today I have a new song. It came out a couple weeks ago. I've been saving it since we haven't been able to do a new show.
Yeah.
Micah Tyler. He's got a couple songs out. Great artist. He has a song called New Today, which talks about how God's mercies are new today. And this song, I'm telling you, there's a part of this song where it's a mic drop moment.
Really?
Yeah. It's just like boom. And you're just like, whoa, what just happened? So I'm going to have Micah, share about this song. And then we're going to hear some of Micah Tyler, New Today.
My song, New Today, is probably the most personal song that I've ever written, but I'm learning that the more personal my songs are, a lot of the times it becomes more personal for some of you. We were walking through the effects of Hurricane Harvey on our home, and also my brother who's in the middle of battling stage 4 colon cancer. And it was in the weakest of moments where I just said, God, I know your word says that your mercies are made new, but I need you to remind my heart of the truth behind that. And he did. One day at a time. Maybe you've been in a season like that, like I have recently, where that darkness just kind of feels like it's going to hang out there forever. But as soon as the sun breaks the horizon and lights everything up, we're reminded of the newness of a new day. Hopefully this song will be something that encourages you in that way and reminds you that God's mercies are made new today.
Your mercies are new today.
Heard a lot from him, but I really like it. It's really good.
It's great stuff. It really is.
Yeah. Well, my song, we play this on Spark, I think. I believe. It's a band called Surfaces, and they sing a song called Sunday Best. And it's just like, good vibes only. I think it really fits with our generation. This is got my sunshine on my Sunday best. So here's a song called Sunday Best by Surfaces.
Feeling blessed, never stressed. Got that sunshine on my Sunday best.
It is a feel-good song.
It's fun.
What do you say again? Good vibes?
Good vibes only.
Good vibes
only. And then you gotta
only.
throw up peace signs.
Peace signs?
Good vibes only.
I'm down with it. Okay, it's time to now go back in time. Our oldie but goldie. We're going back to 1986.
13 years before I was born.
I was still in high school. This is an artist who's been around since about 1980. She released during her career, still out there doing stuff, 22 albums, had 33 number one songs during her career. She was named the Female Vocalist of the Year 3 years in a row back in the day, and might even have been this year, 1986. This year, she had the number one song in Christian music, and it's a song called Runner, and I'm talking about Twyla Paris.
I've heard of her.
So give it a listen.
I haven't heard that song, but I've heard of her, and it was really good.
Yep.
I liked it.
So that wraps up Music Matters. Time now to move into Culture Shock. So in Culture Shock, we celebrate someone who's making a difference for the kingdom of God in a unique way. Today, we're celebrating not only a ministry, but someone who is affected by this ministry.
Sweet.
His name is Alfio, and Alfio was arrested more than 50 times.
Oh, wow.
Put in prison. He served 11 years in prison, was released 2 years earlier than he was scheduled. But while he was in prison, there was a ministry that was able to reach out to him, which is called the Hollywood Impact Studios Prison Ministry.
It's awesome.
Hollywood Impact Studios was founded by Gary and Cindy Hall back in 2008, and their goal was simple: to share the gospel and teach Los Angeles County Jail inmates a trade so that they would be able to make money after being released from prison. Now, this is interesting because Gary Hall was the vice president of 20th Century Fox,
Wow.
the movie studio.
Really?
Before he was in movies, he was a police officer, and his wife was a former social worker. So they understood the social ills of society and what it would take. So after 20 years in the movie business, him and his wife decided that they were going to create this ministry called Hollywood Impact Studios to simply teach prisoners a trade and try to give them a foot up. They say they use the art of television and filmmaking to change lives by providing a training ground where Hollywood professionals teach and mentor incarcerated men, helping them to develop their individual talents in order to successfully work in their profession of their choosing. God gave them this plan to do this, and Alfeo was led to Christ while in prison through this ministry.
Sweet.
They taught Alfeo a skill as well. What happens is Alfeo now today lives with his wife. They live in Washington State, and they make crosses. He studied the trade of woodworking, and so he builds crosses for churches, and he actually most recently built a cross for the ministry, Hollywood Impact Ministry. It's a gift representing peace and hope. This is what Alfeo says. They're handcrafted crosses. They're all across the United States now, and it's super awesome that this cross that he made for them, that Alfeo thinks is special. He believes God led him to make this cross to spell out the pain that Jesus went through on the cross. We have to appreciate the sacrifice, is what Alfeo says, of Jesus on the cross. He said, I had to pick a side when he chose Christ in prison. I had to pick a side, and I picked Jesus Christ. He said, follow me, and it'll be better than you think. And so that's what he did. So I just think it's awesome that, one, you have this ministry, Hollywood Impact Studios, that's created out of this husband and wife. They were in the film industry. They also understood police work and social work, which was their early career, and able to turn that into something making a difference. And then you had Alfeo, who is one of the many testimonies of their ministry, who is now building crosses for churches and making a living, and him and his wife being able to support them at the same time. Awesome stuff. Check out HollywoodImpactStudios.com if you want to know more about that ministry.
That's awesome.
They are difference makers and doing it in unique ways, and that's what Culture Shock is all about.
Well, that wraps up this episode of The Kitchen Table. If you want to contact us, the best way is by going to the Shine.fm Facebook page, and under the group tab link, there's the Kitchen Table group, and there we just want to continue on the conversation of faith, of music, and of culture, because we love difference makers in this culture.
So thank you so much for tuning in this week. And again, reach out to us if you want to give a little commentary, question, whatever you have to the program. Have a wonderful week.
And stay salty and lit.
Thanks for listening to The Kitchen Table on the Shine.fm podcast network from Olivet Nazarene University. Be sure to subscribe for more content delivered each week on faith, music, and culture.